afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm already talking, but I'm very much assuming that you are also listening to the computer voice introducing the platform to you. That's also always the thing that happens to me if I join this meeting, that 1 minute this computer voice is talking to me. So I give this another half a minute before we actually start with the town hall. I see quite a few people joining. Leo, I didn't ask you before we met here. Do we actually have an estimate how many people registered for the event? Do you have this on hand?
No, not on hand.
Yeah,
I'll,
okay.
I'll check. Yeah.
Usually would expect a little bit more than we have now. We have 12 people being in the room, which is already great. Thank you for the interest. Other than that, I think we can start with the town hall for today. Welcome everybody to our town hall week after the MSC 111 taking place. MSC 11 took place last week and the week before. I think it started on Wednesday, and so an 8-day long meeting in London. And we are very glad to have our speakers here with us. Obviously, you can see them in the camera pictures here. So we have Brandon Larson being our mass expert. You all remember him from our mass town hall. And the topic of mass is also our focus today. So he will be reporting about the things that were happening around mass last week and the week before. Ero Letavara being our accredited representatives to the IMO, also joining, also engaging in the mass topic. And if there's anything else to fill the gaps after Brandon's presentation, then Ero can chip in. And you all know Leo Budicin, our IMO coordinator. He will then afterwards, after the mass topic, will report about the greenhouse gas safety works and give a short summary about everything that took place other than those two topics. You can see the agenda from the MSC 11 meetings here on the screen. Obviously, quite a long agenda with 22 items in total. Not all of them are really, let's say, of general interest to CIMAC and its community. But obviously, with Leo and Brandon being in the room full time, all the 8 days, being able to follow the other topics. So Leo will be able to give a short summary about, let's say, about the other topics in that sense. So after this introduction, I think the next slide will start with the chapter of mass. If that's right, yes, there it is. And Brendan, I'd like you to give you the microphone and start with the mass code and what are the learnings from last week.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Daniel. Good afternoon, everybody. Give you just an update of how MSC 111 went over the past 2 weeks. I will say it was quite long days. I think we started anywhere between 8:30 and 9 a.m. every morning, and worked generally until 7 or 8 p.m. every day, and we also worked Saturday. So it was a long period that we did a lot of work on this. So what you'll see there is essentially a summary of what the framework looks like. So it was released and adopted on Thursday last week as the non-mandatory mass code, effective the 1st of July. It took about 10 years worth of IMO work to be able to put the non-mandatory code together, and then it establishes that framework for MOS. It still has some things that we'll have to tackle in the experience building phase. I'll kind of cover that in a couple of slides. But the key takeaway is it is goal-based, it is technology neutral, and it was trying to steer as best as we could towards being performance-oriented. So, next slide, please. So like I mentioned, so it goes into effect on the 1st of July of this year as non-mandatory, and expecting it to be made mandatory in 2032 at the MSC session that year. In between those two is what's called the experience building phase. A lot of things that ended up being somewhat questionable during the working group discussions, most of it was basically mentioned, okay, then we're going to have to work on that in the experience building phase. And so that framework on how to submit for the experience building phase, that will be discussed at the next MSC on sort of what that format needs to be for shipping companies and whatnot to be able to submit to IMO for the EBP. And that EBP is essentially the data collection point, so that the working group that will handle MOS until the 2032 active date, to where it becomes mandatory, all of those inputs will then be taken in by the working group in order to modify the non-mandatory code so that we know what the mandatory code is going to look like. So that's going to take quite a few sessions. There was some discussion on should we have correspondence groups as well on sort of the off cycle when the working group isn't meeting. I don't think that was totally decided yet. My suspicion is it will probably happen just because there's a lot of material. The code itself, I believe, is like 170 pages, so it's quite lengthy. It was one of the larger ones that was discussed during the IMO session, so it took quite a bit. So next slide, please, Daniel. Or Leo, thanks. So it's broken into 3 parts. So part 1 is just the intro. I would pay attention to the definition section. I think we took an entire day just to go through definitions and what that meant and what that application looks like. Part 2 has its main principles. So this is certification and survey. Probably what's most important for like OEMs like myself is both the certification, the approval process, the risk assessment portion, and also human element. And then in part 3, this is much more specific. So remote operations is in there, the machinery is in there, sort of the fire and safety and emergency functions. This is where it like talks about towing and things like that. So so there's a stability and things like that. So there's a little bit of everything kind of caught up in part 3 on specific requirements. So next slide. So essentially, if you look at it, the best way to think of the code is look at it from a system of systems perspective, right? So this addresses the interaction between the ship systems itself, whether it's bridge systems or engine control room, propulsion related systems, how that software and automation interacts with each other, connectivity. We had a rather lengthy discussion on connectivity. It was actually a bit humorous too, because at the time we actually dropped Wi-Fi right at the time of a connectivity discussion. So that kind of drove home the point of doing connectivity at all times. So it kind of made the point to the legal people in the room that sometimes that can be difficult, and how us as engineers have to kind of work around that. So I just thought that was a bit comical at the point, but it was perfectly timed from an engineering standpoint. And then there was some discussion on remote operation centers. How does the certification work for them? Probably the key thing for any MOS is the concept of operations. So anytime a MOS ship is going to operate from port A to port B, the whole voyage concept of operations has to be talked about. How does a remote operations center work within that? What are those operational envelopes, what's called OE, if you read in the code, as well as operational design domain. A lot of that just goes into trying to define what that voyage looks like. If that vessel goes off that voyage and onto something else, gets changed on its route or something like that, then a new ConOps has to be written for that. And then flag state has to review that and certify that. Certain coastal states will have to look at it, if you're transiting past and whatnot. So so a lot of that is defined in there on how that will work. And then Probably the other critical piece is fallback states. I've kind of mentioned that in the previous town hall on what that means. It's not how we've always kind of viewed it as redundancy of operations, where I have two pumps or I have two filters or something like that. Now it is much more both what we have traditionally with redundancy, but also degraded operation. How do I still maintain what's in the ConOps if I have a degraded state of a particular system or component or subsystem? So, and what's the contingency planning around that, which is unique to that particular MOS ship. So yeah, really, safety is now defined at the system level. It's not just through the physical design. So probably the biggest takeaway I took from it is that type approval by itself is not enough. You now have to look at it from a holistic ship perspective and the fallback states within that ship, and how do I keep operations to meet the requirements of the ConOps. So, I'll let Arrow chime in on this one if he's got any other view on that piece, because I think that's kind of a critical piece to understand.
I think that one of the key points there is a little bit from my perspective that it was, as you said, we struggled a lot with definitions and how things are going to be made. I would say that in plain language, a lot of this is very unclear, and the experience building phase is now the time when we are really looking at how to do things and how to even define the system and how to make sure that the system works. I would say that this is now when the work starts, and maybe one of the things that we need to agree on is how are we going to be involved in putting the engineering perspective into focus in this case.
Yep, I completely agree with that, Arrow. For the lawyers that were in the room at the working group, it was obvious that they're very good at writing law, right, or regulation, but their understanding of engineering is a bit lacking. We had to do a bit of education on even what's the difference between verification and validation. They were trying to talk through that, software testing and simulation and things like that. Oh, well, we'll catch that in verification. And it's like, time out, folks. That's not quite what you're asking for. So that's not really the definition. So that's where I think we're gonna, as CIMAC, we're gonna have to add some rigor into the experience building phase to try to help define that better and get the code, when it becomes mandatory, written around an engineering perspective on how do we do systems of systems kind of operation. So
just to add on that, I think that it was quite clearly highlighted how important words are and the semantics. We spent a lot of time to explain to each other the views from different perspectives. What does words like real time, at all times, continuous, what do they mean? And there were even comments like real time. That's something where you get information in 24 hours, which is the BBC definition. Definitely not what our automation software engineers would use as a real time. And then these are the topics that we need to be able to address so that it's done correctly. You could say that with some of the wordings that are in there at the moment, there is no code because it's impossible to build.
Yeah, exactly. So it's essentially, for lack of a better phrase, the non-mandatory code is a rough framework that is goal-based to try to understand how you do remote operations. If I had to sum it up, leaving the week and a half, I think that's kind of how I would sum it. So
I would support that 100%, your comment.
Yeah, so as Arrow mentioned, there's still a lot of heavy lifting that we're going to have to do as CIMAC in inputting things that we want to see into that code for some engineering rigor. So So I've kind of mentioned it. Oh, sorry. Next slide, please, Leo. Yeah, human element. This is probably another key piece. One thing that was put into the code, which I completely agree with, is remote operation centers. The people who are manning those have to meet STCW. So that I was glad to see that that was agreed upon. Flag administrations can treat an ROC or a ROC. Sometimes you'll hear it mentioned as that. The ROC is directly associated with the bridge in a lot of their view, but we had to remind a lot of folks that not only it is at the bridge, but it's also the engine control room and just the operations of the ship in general, plus the cyber piece. So there's a lot more than just, you know, looking out the windows kind of view that goes on, because treating it ship a system of systems, I think, is kind of the critical piece we tried to mention. So there is always going to be a master associated with the ship. If there is crew embarked on the ship, then there will be a master on the ship. If it is purely autonomous with no one embarked, then the master resides in the position at the rock. So that's kind of how the code was written. So it's not really, you know, as the bumper sticker down on the bottom says, IMO is not removing a human accountability. It's just redistributing it depending on what the ConOps looks like for the operation of that MOS ship. So, next slide, please, Leo. And then sort of operational safety items here. So resilience and autonomy. So you have to look at all of the failure conditions and how, you know, so it's like an FMEA with outer layers of FMEA on how does that interact with everything. How do you handle degraded states? How do you handle cyber events? Communication loss, you know, like I was just mentioning, you know, with connectivity, you know, is the ConOps going to have loss of connectivity? Do you maintain last known course and speed? Do you stop and loiter until you pick up a signal again? I don't know what that's going to look like. There was some discussions on some of those, but so kind of more to follow on that one. I think it's going to be unique to the case of each ConOps. Core design elements, I've mentioned the fallback states already. Contingency management. I kind of liken this to, you know, working for an aerospace company. We do a lot of flight operations, and, you know, as you do like a transatlantic flight, for example, you know, you have to have locations for diversion. And so there's sort of that similar idea on how do you do contingency management for a voyage. Alert prioritization. This goes back to the alert management and the criticality of not having alarm floods. Another aviation view on that one, if you sit in a cockpit, if you have an error state or something that's alarming or alerting you, the emergency ones get priority, followed by lesser ones, and then informational. If you have, you know, two go off at the same time, one's an emergency and one's informational, the informational one gets suppressed until the emergency one is dealt with. Then it will let you know the other one exists. So a lot of prioritization is probably going to come out of this on how that happens. And like I mentioned, redundancy is only just a part of the solution. Now there's also the fallback state and degraded operations. So, and kind of like I mentioned before too. So there's the, you know, there's like the emergency aspects. How do you handle towing? I think the jury is still out on how pilot operations are going to happen. I think that's going to have to be addressed in each ConOps, and whether each arriving port or departing port is going to allow remote operation. My personal guess is probably the pilot's going to be on board, even if it's considered an autonomous ship, which means then they'll probably have to have a master on board too. So, but there's that shift towards resilience-based regulation and not just the type approvals. So, next slide, please. So yeah, sort of the strategic outlook of this. So some of the other unresolved things, legal liability, this is left up to the flag states at the moment. How do you handle the collision regulations? You know, the 72 call regs and its interaction You know, because there's a part in the call regs, for example, for those of us who are deck officers. You know, what do you consider as insight of one another? Now you have all these electronic means. Is that now considered insight of? Don't know. So I think that's going to have to get defined in some of the other IMO sessions and working groups. AI transparencies, ROC governance, a lot of that will have to come out in the ConOps. Same thing with cyber risk regulation, you know, to make sure that you don't have, you know, penetration into the system from outside the ship. And then just other IMO bodies in general, whether it's the container folks or the human factors, ship design and construction and whatnot. So all these other entities are going to have to look at it. They're going to be providing comment into the non-mandatory code for the working group to incorporate and make some changes. So that's essentially where it's going to go over the next few years. There was some debate on, does it become mandatory in 2032? Should we make it 2036 and have a 10-year EBP? There wasn't a lot of support for that. It was probably about 70-30 mixed in the room on should it just be the 5-year or should it be a 10-year. So I think there's still more to come on the timeline on discussion on that. I will say probably the next 2 years is going to solidify how to submit comments and items for the experience building phase. I think that's probably the most critical piece at the moment. So that way we can try to inject some clarity into some things, whether it's in the definitions or other parts of the code. So next slide. Okay, yeah. Arrow, any other comments from you in general on the MOS code?
No, the general comment that I've said so many times throughout the years is that I'm completely convinced that we will have fully autonomous commercial merchant vessels on the spot markets within the next 200 years. But I would say that to be serious, this gives us the possibility to give comments, input into the code, and that also through a kind of stepwise approach, which gives us the possibility to start working on and having autonomous or semi-autonomous functions and tasks on board ships, where we start to learn how they work together, and also how are we going to build the ship as a system, and then what are the key components that actually need to understand each other and how they need to understand each other, are going to be at least for the next 4 years. Otherwise, I agree with you that what I heard in IMO on the corridors was that 32 might be a possibility. Some people vote for 36, but nearly everyone said that 40 is too long, too far away. So somewhere there, depending very much on where we are going to be with this experience building phase and then what kind of input we get.
Yep.
But that's it, I think, from our side.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thank you. And I guess it's back to Leo, who's covering everything else.
Okay, so I'll take it then from here. Once again, good afternoon to everyone. I think that we can now move to the second major theme, if I can say like this, of MSC 111, which was the development of the safety regulatory framework that supports decarbonization and alternative fuels. So one of the most important observations probably from this session is that the IMO regulatory thinking is evolving far beyond the individual fuels. Initially, when the discussion started, so talking about years ago, much of the discussions were around decarbonization, and decarbonization focused on replacing conventional fuels with alternative fuels. Now we know that this approach has shifted, and the IMO increasingly views decarb through the broader perspective of integrated ship energy systems. This has also been reflected in the discussion over the past 2 weeks, as I have covered a remarkably broad range of technologies and energy pathways that include the one that you see here on the right-hand side of the slide: ammonia, hydrogen, methanol. There was a discussion about fuel cells, the topic of batteries, something that now comes over more and more IMO committees and subcommittees, which is onboard carbon capture, wind-assisted propulsion, of course, but also the topic that is now back being hot, which is the nuclear system. So there was really a wide range of technology that has been discussed, and this is also highly significant because it reflects the reality that the industry still does not know concretely which and how are the pathways that will ultimately dominate the market. So the IMO is attempting to develop a flexible regulatory framework which is capable of accommodating multiple future energy solutions, and this is something that has been really the thread over those 10 days in London. Another major theme was the increasing recognition that safety cannot be addressed fuel by fuel in isolation. Instead, here we see regulation that must increasingly consider integrated energy architectures, operational interactions between systems, life cycle safety, something that we talk a lot now at the IMO, but also system-wide risk management. Because introducing alternative fuels, of course, as we all know, affects not only the fuel storage itself, but also ventilation systems, firefighting arrangements, machinery configuration, and really the whole system. So getting back also to what was Brandon saying before, really seeing it as a system of system. And this is why, I repeat it again, that the IMO is increasingly moving towards integrated risk management methodology. And on this regard, the discussion has repeatedly emphasized the hazard identification, operational controls, contingency planning, and system level safety integration. Now, moving forward, one of the other topics that was on the agenda, and that is something that is very much a high priority, is the one ship, one code approach or principle. So the issue became increasingly important because many future vessels may combine characteristics that would historically or that can fall, that would theoretically be under different IMO codes. And the central principle that has been agreed now and approved at the MEC 111 is a one that is relatively simple, something that we have talked already, that is already in the public space, that a ship or a vessel should only be subject to one gas-related safety code. In practice, what the conclusion here is, what does it mean? This means that the gas carriers remain regulated under the IGC code. At first glance, of course, this may appear to be relatively technically just a drafting clarification, but in reality, it is more than that, and it is extremely important for future implementation. And this comes to be particularly relevant for ammonia-fueled gas carriers, LNG applications, LPG systems, and also ethane operations. So without clarifications, some vessels, as I said before, could potentially be subject to multiple regulatory frameworks simultaneously, and this is something that, of course, everybody wants to avoid, because this could create conflicting safety philosophies, duplicate approval processes, having inconsistent survey approaches, and operational uncertainty. And this is why this session of the MSC has finalized amendment to SOLAS Chapter 2 and the IGF code, specifically in order to reflect indeed the one ship, one code policy. So one particular important clarification to close with this topic is that is the explicit confirmation that the IGF code, so the other one, not the IGC, but the IGF, do not apply to gas carriers. When we talk about fuels, there are two important things that has been decided, or rather adopted. The first one, I'll start with hydrogen. MSC 111 approved the interim guidelines for ships using hydrogen as a fuel. These guidelines cover both liquefied and compressed hydrogen arrangements, and the discussions here clearly showed that hydrogen introduces risk characteristics that are, of course, very different from conventional marine fuels. Key areas of concerns that still persist here include fuel containment, leak prevention, fire protection, as well as explosion risk management and risk-based system design. So we know that the traditional fuel safety approach doesn't apply anymore because it cannot simply be transferred directly to hydrogen application. And this is why the IMO is increasingly relies on goal-based and risk-based methodologies for these systems. Something similar has been done at the same time with ammonia. The committee has approved here interim guidelines for the use of ammonia cargo as fuel, although of course it is a bit it's different. The hydrogen, ammonia introduces entirely different safety concerns, so the primary issue is not or not exclusive inflammability, but toxicity. And so here, as a result, the regulatory focus heavily emphasized personnel protection, hazardous area management, containment, integrity, operational procedure, ventilation, and emergency response. And here it is quite important also to mention that future fuel transitions are not only engineering transition, they are also operational and human transitions. And here, once again, this demonstrates how much the IMO increasingly views decarb through an integrated systems perspective that has to take into account many different things and many different aspects to make it work. Now, if we go a little bit beyond the fuel, it is now very clear, and is something again that has been discussed for a long time, and it's clear to everyone. The future maritime decarbonization extends well beyond alternative fuels only. There is also a broad range of emerging technologies that are increasingly becoming part of the future ship energy architectures, and that has been discussed during this session of the MSC committee. The first one that I would like to mention is the battery energy storage system, the BESS. Here also CIMAC is involved in the correspondence group that has been established. So we have experts contributing to the corresponding group that deals with this topic with batteries. It is important here to mention that now it has been agreed, that the MSC has agreed to prioritize work on battery safety and integrated BESS related work into the SDC, so the Ship Design and Construction Subcommittee work plan. So it's something that it will be, from a technical point of view, dealt there. The discussions that we have had recognize that batteries are no longer simply auxiliary technologies. They are increasingly becoming central elements of future ship power systems. The regulatory aspects here includes, or what the regulatory is focusing on. It includes fire safety, thermal runaway prevention, redundancy, emergency response, and power stability. So things that the subcommittee, the SDC, will still be working on. So here the regulatory milestone, or what do we see? It's around 2028. Of course, is not set in stone. The date, the future development of SOLAS amendment should take place, the one that would allow batteries to serve as main source of electric power. This is, of course, highly significant, because SOLAS assumption were originally built around conventional engine-based power systems. Moving on to onboard carbon capture. Here, the discussion highlighted several emergency safety challenges that are associated with this kind of systems. That includes CO2 storage, pressure management, integration with exhaust system, and operational procedure. We know that this is also a topic that has been dealt also with the MEPC as a technology also within the net zero framework, and the decision of how to treat it, especially if you talk about the NZF, that is still unclear, and the discussion on that continue. Here, the timeline that we see, or that we would like to see, is to have around, again, 2028 interim safety guidelines on OCCS. Moving forward to the wind propulsion and wind assisted system. Here we talk, of course, about rotor sails, wing sails, and hybrid propulsion arrangement. Although at first sight it might seem, even from a regulatory point of view, to be not simple, but more simple compared with fuels such as hydrogen and ammonia. Here also the discussions showed that there are significant technical issues that still need to be solved, and they involve structural loads, maneuverability, stability, visibility, and other topics that will still need a closer look. Here, the IMO expects to continue developing dedicated safety framework for such technologies, with a timeline, again, not fixed, but we talk about 2029. And finally, the last technology on this slide, so the nuclear propulsion. We know also that the nuclear code is being under development. So here the work is expected to continue on revising the nuclear, the code of safety for nuclear ships, which reflects also the growing industry, but also geopolitical interest in nuclear marine applications. And the discussion here On the other side, emphasize the reactor safety, containment, operational governance, and emergency preparedness. And when we talk of a possible timeline, here we are around 2030. So to conclude with this slide, here it is becoming more and more evident. The IMO is now trying to build the regulatory foundations capable of safety managing the complexity that these technologies pose, but also the complexity of having them together. And the last slide to close the part on GHG safety, it's the strategic outlook. Here, one thing has become quite clear: the future maritime safety regulation is becoming, as which actually sum up a little bit what I've said up until now, that is becoming increasingly integrated. Discussions here during the last 2 weeks in London repeatedly highlighted concepts such as integrated energy system safety, life cycle risk assessment, something that is also coming up very on a regular basis, also in a discussion in the MEPC committee, integrated operational management, and the performance-based regulation. But this also reflects a broader realization that future ship safety cannot be managed through isolated technical rules alone. Instead, we see that safety increasingly depends on how multiple systems interact together. Alternative fuel frameworks increasingly includes operations. They include also crew trainings, human factors, the more and more discussed topic of cyber resilience, of emergency preparedness, and how to integrate all of this also in the ship design. Because, for example, introducing ammonia fuel is not, of course, only about designing safe fuel tanks, and it also requires operational procedures, emergency medical response capabilities if there is the need for it, ventilation strategies, and everything that I have said a while ago. But similarly, this goes the same when it comes to digitalization, because increasing digitalization and automated energy management introduce also growing cyber dependency, the topic that is becoming more and more current. And so as a result, cyber resilience is gradually becoming something that is really, that we see that is embedded directly into core maritime safety governance. And to conclude, the next years, what we will probably see, it is a determination, or we will see more clearly which fuel pathway achieve commercial scalability. This goes hand in hand with the discussion that we are having again about the net zero framework and how to get to an agreement when it comes to that. Which are the technology that will mature operationally, and also how rapidly the IMO's safety framework will evolve. So I would say that these are the main outcomes when we talked about the GHG safety agenda item. And now, before going to the very last slide, maybe Daniel, I give the floor back to you for a moment.
Yeah, thank you, Leo, for this introduction to all the topics. I think I did not mention yet, but hopefully everybody's aware. If you have questions, you were able to type those questions into the Q&A session on the top right corner of your screen, or there's a chat also available. So whoever wants to ask a question is welcome to do so via the chat or the Q&A section. Yeah, other than that, I think Leo, you can continue with the other outcomes, and then if questions come in, we can go on to them. Thank you.
Yes, so let's move to the other outcomes. Of course, we know that that not only mass and the GHG safety topics were on the agenda of MSC 111. I'll just go now a little bit through the outcomes that are more relevant to our membership and what do we do as at CIMAC. So first of all, again, getting back a little bit what I have just mentioned about cybersecurity. Here, the committee has approved the roadmap that has been established and that has been proposed by the facilitation committee on to start working on a maritime cyber code, and this will be probably done through an intersessional working group that should start in 2027, but there should be also a correspondence group, so something that as CIMAC we will be following. The same goes for the IMO strategy on maritime digitalization. Here again, the MSC approved the plan or supported the plan that has been developed by FAL 50 to conclude the work on the strategy, and there should be a reporting to the first to the MEPC later this year, and then also to the MSC. So the work continues on that, and there will be also considered whether the strategy on maritime and digitalization may be integrated in the overall IMO strategic guidelines for until 2029. Then another topic was the engine control room alert management, what is known as ECRAM. Daniel will also have an information a little about it later. Here, again, the roadmap has been endorsed for the development of performance standards, and what we are expecting on or what is scheduled to be seen is the finalization of new performance standards by 2028. So we will be also looking at that and following the discussion there. Then one of the discussion that was a little bit more, if I can say, tensed at MSC was the LRIT, so the long range identification and tracking of ships. Just to say that the idea here was to have a free of charge policy for the provision of LRIT for coastal states that are eligible to that. And of course, it was a little bit tense because we had a group of member states that were not fine with having it free of charge. But in principle, it has been agreed to revise it and to have it free of charge and to move forward with this proposal. And lastly, as you might have heard, there have been also several MSC adopted several amendments to mandatory instruments. The one that includes SOLAS on satellite communications, updates of the ESP, IP, and the LSA codes, amendments to the load lines protocol and the IMDG codes, as well as other guidelines apart from the one that I have already mentioned on the ammonia and hydrogen, guidelines on remote inspection techniques, dangerous good carriage, and life-saving appliance safety. So many things, not all of them directly linked to the work that we do and the topics that we follow at the IMO. But definitely, if you have any additional question or would like to hear or would like to know more about any of them, please don't hesitate to get in touch. So I would stop here, and then Daniel, the floor back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you once again. As you already mentioned, I wanted to highlight one of our upcoming events, and as it was already mentioned here, the topic of ECRAM, the Engine Control Room Alert Management System. Our digitalization strategy group decided a while ago that we will hold our next after CIMAC Circle, I must say, because the next CIMAC Circle will be happening this Monday in Athens on the eve before Posidonia. But the next after CIMAC Circle will take place at SMM in Hamburg on Thursday afternoon, and we were able to get a spot on the digital stage in Hall B6. And the digitalization strategy group decided on the topic of empowering human and digital crew member interaction about ECRAM and HCD. And in that event, there will be a keynote speech and a panel discussion, as we always do with the CIMAC circles. And there we will show CIMAC's perspective on providing sufficient awareness to make the right decision with the right information for the right situation for the right time. Bringing context to alarms and making alerts manageable, empowering the humans on board to act with confidence in interaction with digital crew members. So it's all about ECRAM and HCD, the Engine Control Room Alert Management Performance Standard, and a human-centric design, a very complex topic and a very important topic for the current situation already, but also even more for the future when we come into more and more autonomous parts of the shipping. And it will be quite interesting, and we will definitely advertise the event more with also with the including the names of the keynote speakers and the panelists and so on. And then we will be inviting you everyone to this event. Other than that, I think that was all for this advertisement stretch here. And if there are any questions, I didn't see any in the Q&A session. Other than that, Leo, Brandon, Eero, anything else to say?
No, we can always answer by email too if somebody has a question.
Exactly. You have all our contact details, especially from Leo, as he was sharing the invite for this event. And you can contact him in first place for questions. The recording and the presentation will, as always, be available on our website. And if you have colleagues who were not able to join today, they will have the chance to look at the recording or look at the presentation there. All right. I think with that, we can conclude the town hall for today. Thank you once again to Leo, Brandon, and Eero for all the insights from the last 2 weeks in London. And looking forward to the next one.
Thank you, everyone, and then have a nice weekend coming up.
Yep. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.